Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Voices of Forestry podcast. I'm your host, Seth Stevenson, the communications coordinator with the Arkansas Forestry Association. And this month, we are talking about the European Union Deforestation-free product regulation, which is commonly referred to as the EUDR, and I will be referring to it as the EUDR because that's a little bit easier to say. But we're going to be talking about that today with some representatives from the American Forest and Paper Association, AF&PA. They are joining us today on this episode. But before I introduce them, let me give a shout out and a special thank you to our sponsors this month, PotlatchDeltic. We're going to hear a little bit more from them later on in this episode. But for now, I'm joined by David Ross, the Director of Government Affairs with AF&PA, and Mark Pitts, the Executive Director of Printing, Writing, Pulp, and Tissue with AF&PA. Gentlemen, thank you guys for joining me on this Zoom meeting this afternoon.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
All right. Well, now, I kind of gave you guys a little bit of a warning at the top of this when we were discussing things before we started recording. If you guys don't mind, we'll actually start with David. And if can y'all just provide a quick little personal history for our listeners, just to set up your credentials, if you will, for the ongoing conversation we're about to have.
Sure. Thanks, Seth. I've been here at AF&PA for just under 3 years now. Originally from the great state of Illinois. I was working for a member of Congress on the House side from about 2016 until 2022. For this on a number of different issues: trade, transportation, tax issues, workforce stuff. My old boss was on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, the House Agriculture Committee, and the House Administration Committee. So really kind of got to work on a lot of these issues for him, and now have got to sort of translate that to representing our members here at AF&PA, and really enjoy getting to work with Mark on this very important regulation for our members.
And then for me, Mark Pitts, and I've been with AF&PA for about 15 years now. And I represent the manufacturers of pulp products, printing and writing paper products, and tissue products. And prior to AF&PA, I was also in the industry for 25 years as a manufacturer. So paper is near and dear to my heart, and I enjoy working on the industry's behalf. So appreciate you having us.
Yeah, and thank you guys for joining us. I know you guys have had kind of a busy schedule with this and plenty of other things, so I appreciate you guys taking the time and talking this out with us on what exactly is going on here. So, because this is a national issue, this isn't just an Arkansas-specific issue. Heck, it's even an international issue, but we're going to kind of focus more on what's going on here in the US of A. So, gentlemen, can you just explain to our folks what exactly is the European Union Deforestation-free product regulation?
So this is a regulation that's really part of a broader umbrella of European Green Deal policies that aims to reduce the EU's dependency on the consumption of products that may be linked to global deforestation and forest degradation. It went into effect in June of 2023. And the implementation is scheduled for December here at 2025. And what it does essentially is it's a international regulation, as you mentioned, Seth, and it requires that companies, both importers and exporters and intra-EU companies who place certain agricultural commodities and products in the EU market or out of the EU market that include wood and wood products, prove that those products do not originate from deforested land or have contributed to forest degradation after 2020. So that's, in essence, what it is. It spells out an unprecedented level of due diligence requirements in order to put products on the market or exit from the market, which we had never seen before, and is very problematic for the U.S. forest products supply chain. And the goal here really is to look into those supply chains very deeply. And it was originally sort of designed for the bad actors, given that commodities like cocoa or soy in some countries, or rubber, or those kinds of materials, palm oil, a lot of that comes from very specific properties in different parts of the world, and that's what they're trying to go after. But they're really putting in a one-size-fits-all regulation for everybody, and that's where it falls apart for us. We have a very extensive and long supply chain, and in the US, we already do not contribute to global deforestation. So all of this very expensive, very detailed due diligence requirements to put products on the market simply add costs to our members without any kind of benefits toward the goal of reducing deforestation in the globe.
So you guys mentioned, or Mark, you mentioned that this kind of came about in 2023, doesn't really go into effect here until the end of this year. Is this an issue that you guys have been working on since 23, or did you know about it beforehand and had been kind of doing some prep work up until that point?
Well, we knew about it going back to 2022, actually. There was an international timber regulation called the EUTR, EU Timber Regulation, which really dealt with illegal logging and the trade of illegal timber materials throughout the world. So we were involved in that, and this was an attempt to take this to an even greater step going into 2023. And quite frankly, based on all the requirements that were there, we were surprised that something like this would pass. And then lo and behold, it did. And then all of us were, left with trying to figure out how to, what compliance looks like and what's involved. And we clearly and very quickly came to the conclusion that this was very problematic for the U.S.
And so the main goal of this is to cut down on deforestation, but what exactly are they asking for in this regulation?
Well, there's a lot.
Okay.
It kind of boils down to three major things. Any kind of importer or exporter of these 7 commodity products, which include cattle, cocoa, coffee, palm oil, soy, and wood, they have to prove that in order to put those products on the market in the EU or to export them from the market, that they have to meet 3 primary criteria. One is that they are deforestation free. 2, that they have been produced in accordance with the relevant legislation of the country of origin, and that they are also covered by what's called a due diligence statement. So along with that, there is a long list of information requirements that go along with that, as well as the requirement to register your due diligence statement in an EU information system and be approved in order to put those products on the market.
So deforestation, reducing deforestation in the world is really something that we don't have an issue with. That's something we can all get on board with, and we're already doing sustainability stuff here in the States. But why exactly is the EUDR not a great fit for the US?
Well, in the past, if you go back to the EUTR and other import-export regulations, we are used to this term called proportionality, where the due diligence that you need to do to meet the goal of a regulation should be proportionate to the risk that you pose to that situation. So the big change in the EUDR is that it really turned that whole proportionality concept on its ear and made basically everybody out there do an incredibly complex and costly level of due diligence, basically regardless of your level of risk.
Okay.
And something we've been working on here is looking at, okay, the EU is wanting to establish countries into 3 risk categories: low, medium, and high risk. And we have sort of examined this and looked at the various requirements for each level of risk. And the fact of the matter is whether you're a low risk country or a high risk country, you still have to go through the exact same process for basically 99% of all of the requirements here that Mark's mentioned. And so, they say, hey, we're trying to do this risk assessment, and we want to make sure that we are recognizing those that are not contributing to deforestation as being low risk. But the fact of the matter is when it comes to the requirements that those folks in those countries have to comply with, they're having to comply with the exact same requirements as a country that may be high risk, and we don't think that makes sense.
Okay. So let's kind of get into where you guys come into play here. What exactly have you guys been working on? Because you've been working on this for a bit now, but what are some of the things that you guys have been looking at, or what are some of the challenges, I guess, that you guys have run into when trying to address this regulation and how it can benefit the US and the EU?
Maybe to help you answer that question, Seth, I could just sort of tick through some of the requirements
Yeah.
that are in the regulation, just to give people a sense for what's there, and I think that will help put our advocacy maybe in context. And that is, first of all, you have to, for every shipment of product. So if you think about a container of pulp or a container of container board or paper board, you have to list product description, including a trade name, type of the product, as well as the common name of species and their full scientific name. You have to identify the quantity of the product expressed in kilograms of net mass. You have to identify the country of the production. Those are all pretty easy. And now we get into some of the more detailed things where you have to submit precise location of all plots of land that may be associated with that shipment, including the dates of production or the harvest. You have to identify the name, postal address, and email address of any business or person from whom you've been supplied with any of the inputs. You also have to provide the name, postal address, and email address of any person or operator that you have provided information to. So you basically have to identify both your upstream and downstream supply partners. You have to provide adequately conclusive and verifiable proof that the products are free of deforestation or forest degradation risk that may be due to the complexity of your supply chain, mixing of products, and that there's no circumvention of EUDR that has occurred since December of 2020. You have to prove that you've got conclusive and adequate information that the product was produced lawfully in the country of your production. And then you are subject to audits and checks from the different countries wherever you are importing your product in. And if there is any kind of risk of deforestation or degradation, then you have to complete a separate risk assessment for products that might be non-compliant or risk of non-compliance. And then you also have to present a risk mitigation plan or procedures or measures so that you can achieve a no or negligible risk status. So the biggest difficulties for us relate to that geolocation and traceability, where you have to identify every single individual plot of land that may be associated with a shipment that you have put on the market.
And I want to touch on that real quick, especially for those who may be listening who don't quite maybe fully understand what exactly the process into making paper or any kind of paper product is. It's not like, I take a tree off of my tree farm and I can easily track it through everything. There's something called a term that I learned doing a little bit of research here, fiber flow in our industry. Can one of you guys just kind of explain this term and why it is difficult to provide geolocation for a simple paper product?
Sure. So as you might imagine, most of the material that we use that goes into the manufacture of pulp or paper comes from small non-commercial landowners. And in the case of the United States, we have just under 11 million of those landowners. So when we are getting fiber for our products, we're getting roundwood and pulpwood off those stands from the private landowners. We're also getting about 40% of the incoming material that we get also comes from sawmill residuals, comes from chip manufacturers. It comes from the residues from the forest harvesting operations. So those are the materials that are the most difficult. And our supply chain is long. So we may be cutting timber today that gets stored for months or even up to 2 years before it goes into the mill gate. And we are sourcing wood chips from sawmills from several places that are again getting their materials from various places. Those are stored and supplied, put on chip piles, then get made into pulp. That again gets made into paper. So, basically we are trying to recreate history by saying, hey, we have a shipment of product that we're shipping to the EU, and now we have to go back in time and try to guess where all that material may have come from, based on the time that it may have entered the mill gate, based on the time we may have sourced that kind of material. So it's very complex, and essentially we call it practically impossible to trace, particularly those secondary materials, to an individual precise plot of land where it came from.
Okay. All
In
right.
terms of how
Well,
it might
gentlemen.
be associated with an individual
Mhm.
shipment product.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, if you don't mind, we're going to take a quick pause. I think this is good. And David, I promise you, we're going to get you some questions tossed your way here in a second. But if you guys don't mind, we're going to take a quick second to hear a little bit more from our sponsors this month, PotlatchDeltic.
At PotlatchDeltic, we know Arkansas, our forest, our land, and our people. We are here in Arkansas every day, sustainably managing timberland, producing lumber, developing Chenal properties, neighborhoods, and selling recreational real estate. If you're interested in having a place of your own for hunting, hiking, fishing, or just relaxing, visit our website at potlatchdelticlandsales.com.
Thank you once again to PotlatchDeltic for their continued support of the show. So real quick, before we kind of round out the rest of the questions that I have for you guys, one thing that we were discussing here during the break is the difference for landowners, because this affects them as much as it affects the bigger kind of companies and corporations. Can Mark, can you kind of explain the difference in what an EU landowner currently has to do versus what a U.S. landowner has to do when it comes to sending their product or their timber off to various companies?
Sure. So the regulation is constructed so that it applies to any products that are put on the EU market. So for the US companies, none of our products hit the EU market until it's on a container, on a ship, and lands in the country. But for the EU, a landowner in the EU, for example, as soon as they sell their timber to a timber company or logging company, that sale is considered to be a product sale that's on the market. So that landowner has the responsibility of putting in that due diligence information in terms of mapping their product and registering that sale. And that gets duplicated again and again further down the supply chain, so that when it gets to a paper company, the EU paper company just assembles those already assembled due diligence statements to meet their requirement, as opposed to in the United States, where our paper mill owners, as operators, have to go back and collect all the information on their own.
Okay.
So that's a big distinction, and that's another reason why we feel like this is an unfair trade barrier and treats the EU very differently than the US in terms of technical requirements.
Okay. Well, David, I think we're kind of getting to more your wheelhouse here. Um, but what exactly has our forestry industry been doing to advocate kind of our position and discuss why this is unfair in our eyes?
Sure, thanks, Seth. I think one of the most important things to sort of understand here, first off, is and we mentioned earlier that this went into effect in 2023 and is supposed to be, going into full enforcement at the end of this year. But really, it was scheduled originally to be in full effect in December of last year. And so I believe it was in September. That's when the European Commission formally delayed this regulation going into place by 1 year. And I don't think that would have happened without the voices of a number of different forest and forestry organizations here in the U.S., from all of the different state forestry associations to folks like us here at AFMPA and a number of other national organizations. We really had, for a while, our main goal was to try to get this delayed. And we worked with the U.S. government, we worked with the European Commission and a number of our coalition partners over here. We ended up getting a letter from the Department of Commerce, USDA, and the State Department last year, basically asking for the Europeans to delay this until some of the key issues, like what we've talked about here today, were taken care of. And fortunately, that did get delayed back in September. And so, now we're sort of shifting focus. We know we've got this delay, and now we're shifting focus to, okay, how can we get this regulation changed so that our member companies here and those throughout the U.S. can actually comply.
And so you said you guys have been working with other organizations like AFMPA to kind of communicate these concerns. Is that correct?
Definitely. I think we've seen just a sort of groundswell of support from folks really across the spectrum here in the U.S., whether that's state forestry associations like the Arkansas Forestry Association, but then also partners in our value chain, the American Wood Council, Hardwood Federation, others really have. It's been a group effort, I think, in getting this really as high on the list of things to negotiate with the Europeans as possible.
So we talked too a little bit about the kind of classification, the high risk, high, medium, low kind of classification. Is that really the biggest thing that we're asking for? Or can you just kind of explain what exactly you guys are trying to get changed with this regulation?
Sure. So I think, and Mark can also maybe help a little bit on this, but I'll take a first crack. I think one of the biggest things for us, we feel very strongly that the United States is absolutely a low risk country. According to the EU's own data, we do not have a deforestation problem here. So we're very confident that the U.S. should and will be considered low risk. The problem is, like what we talked about earlier, is a number of these requirements, like the geolocation requirements, those are still in place for even low risk countries. And so something that we've really been working on, I think, is trying to link the risk level and ensuring that is proportional to the due diligence requirements and what you actually have to provide. And so as we've been having conversations with the U.S. government over here and also our friends in the European Commission, that's been a common theme is, listen, the due diligence requirements need to be proportional to your level of risk. And right now, whether you're low, medium, or high risk, everyone has to follow the same requirements. And that doesn't make sense to us.
And so the conversations that you guys have been having with the European Commission, have they been receiving the conversations well? Have they taken, we didn't think about that when in regards to the ask that we're asking for?
I think that working with the European Commission is certainly a lot different than working with the U.S. government. Over here we have pretty, tried and true practices in place when the government is considering doing regulations. There's a long comment process. There's opportunity to provide input. There's opportunity to sort of kind of organize with other stakeholders. And, that's not always the case over there with the European Union and participating in these conversations with the European Commission. They are very skeptical, I think, of sort of third countries coming in and trying to tell them how to do things. But when they're writing a regulation that's going to affect countries like ours here in the U.S., we think that we deserve a seat at the table and making sure that we're providing the important stakeholder input for our folks that are going to have to follow this regulation in the future. I don't know if Mark, you might have more on that.
Part of this is, the European process is that, once a regulation is written, it's done, it's final. So unlike here in the United States, where you might be able to get something amended or changed along the way, once the three different bodies over there, the Commission, the Parliament, and the Council sign off on it, it's done. So as we discuss with the Commission our concerns and changes and recommendations, their answer is, this is the regulation. And, they say that we have to work within the language of the text. And that's as far as you get. It's kind of a talk to the hand kind of response. It's been frustrating with us, but that's what we've gotten mostly.
So surely, and correct me if I'm wrong, or I guess I'll just straight up ask, the U.S., we're not the only ones that have issues with this regulation. Yes, no, or are there other countries who are voicing similar concerns about what they're asking for?
You're right, Seth. And last year, as David mentioned, we had a very broad international coalition. We're all working together to say this regulation is not ready for prime time. There needs to be a delay until we can find a more workable way to accomplish it. And we succeeded in that. But the reality is that, the delay doesn't solve our problems. And other countries have expressed similar concerns as ours. And part of the frustration is that, in the EU, they still have a very strong European Green Deal mindset. And a lot of companies are not willing to be viewed as anti-green and step up and putting up a lot of opposition. So that's part of the position that we're in too, is that we are not quite as unified as we were when we could all say, yes, we need a delay. So different countries, different geographies, different commodities are going to have some nuances in terms of how EUDR affects them specifically. And that's where we are. But I think, we're seeing more and more information coming through that there is concerns about this continuing without some adjustments, and people trying to figure out how we can make those adjustments happen.
So where exactly what's the current state of the EUDR? Where are we currently at? I know, David, this may have been before we actually started recording, but you said that there have already been a little bit of changes, but where's the EUDR currently?
Yeah, Seth, I think what we've been seeing is we have seen a conscious effort from the Europeans to really look at a number of the regulations that they have put into place here over the course of the last few years. And I think that there really is increased interest in trying to simplify some of these regulations. So, for example, the European Union passed an omnibus bill just earlier this year, focused on simplifying certain regulations that they have put into place. EUDR was not in there, but there is, we are hearing, pretty significant chatter about them trying to do something in the future and to try to simplify this regulation. I think that is the result of a lot of pressure being put on them from, our industry here, but also the U.S. government. And as you said earlier, other international stakeholders as well.
And so this doesn't go into effect until later this year, December of 2025. So what does your work or y'all's work at AF&PA look like leading up into that? It is just continuing to have these conversations for those simplified kind of requirements, or what exactly is on y'all's docket for the next couple of months?
So I would say that there are three paths, and we're taking an all of the above approach. And one path is they produce what they call FAQ documents, which is interpretations of how the regulation should be interpreted and used. as well as what they call a guidance document, which is the sort of instructions to help stakeholders. And those are helpful, but they're not legally binding, and they are interpretations. So doesn't necessarily help. But the third one is to actually open up the regulation for amendments. So we are pursuing all of those.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where leaning on the US government and having them negotiate on our behalf as part of the overall trade policy comes into play. So this is where we're headed. We're asking for major changes in the regulation. We totally accept and endorse the idea of being transparent and having some traceability in your products, but just the way they're doing it and the way they're requiring it does not make sense given our supply chain. So we want some of these requirements to be taken off the table if you are a low-risk country, and that would make the due diligence much more proportional to your level of risk.
And I think that sort of, that gets into when you think about this current administration, Seth, so the Trump administration that took office back on January 20th, obviously trade has been an integral piece to their administration, from tariffs to looking at what they call unfair trade practices. So, for example, Seth, back on January 20th, one of the first executive orders that President Trump signed was his America First trade policy executive order. And in there, they basically asked for his team, and that's the Department of Commerce, the U.S. Trade Representative, the State Department, USDA, others, to identify places, whether that be countries or otherwise, where they see unfair trade practices take place. So is that tariffs on U.S. products? Is that regulations that are in place that make it more difficult for U.S. businesses to do business in these countries? Is that a value-added tax? A number of other policies as well. So they actually had a process for stakeholders to provide input on that to the U.S. Trade Representative. AFMPA did submit comments that were back on March 11th, sort of getting into the nitty-gritty on why we do view this as an unfair trade practice. This administration really has been, I think, helpful already. We saw some positive comments from Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick during his January confirmation hearing. There were some questions posed to him from a couple of senators about the EUDR. He said that he does, in his opinion, this is an unfair trade practice. He said that the Trump Department of Commerce should be working with key stakeholders like AFMPA and other folks in sort of the forestry realm. And he thinks that it's something that they want to try to solve. So I think that we've really seen some positive momentum, especially from this administration. They have been, I think, very engaged up to this point, and we appreciate these opportunities to give them more information and give them context as to why this is so difficult for us to comply with.
Well, and that's good, because it seems like I asked how the European Commission were taking some of these requests, but I failed to ask how our government was taking these requests, and it all seems to be good feedback from these very high and key officials. So that's great to hear. Well, gentlemen, that is kind of, where we're at with everything. But is there anything though that you would like to add that maybe I didn't address or we didn't address during our conversation? Is there anything else that y'all want to add to what we've already talked about?
Well, as we have talked to different forest interests, over the last couple of years, I know that forest landowners feel like they're kind of, not so clued in on all the details. And I just want to reinforce that we are aware of the concerns, and we are working hard to try to take some of this problematic regulation out of the picture, and we're working for their interests, and they've got somebody in their corner.
Okay. Well, again, hopefully this episode of our little show will kind of help with some of those fears or concerns, to hear what you guys are doing and the good work that you guys are doing to fight for them. So, yeah,
Seth,
go ahead,
I would
David.
add too that I think, just from a Arkansas specific perspective here, I think that you guys are certainly in really good hands with your congressional delegation. Just recently, we saw a letter from Senator Cotton and Senator Bozeman, as well as the rest of the House delegation to the European Commission, outlining a number of the concerns that we've talked about here today, and saying that they do think of this as an unfair trade practice, especially in the context of the America First trade policy that I mentioned earlier. So just wanted to put a plug in that the Arkansas delegation really has a good understanding of how this is going to affect the industry. And I would also add that even the Secretary of Ag there in Arkansas signed on to a letter earlier this year with a number of other state agriculture commissioners, outlining again basically the same things that we've talked about today. But the important thing is that this is the Arkansas folks specifically are on top of this, and we really appreciate their support.
Yeah. And I'm looking at, that was another thing that I had here in my research. I'm looking at that letter with all 6 of our congressmen's signatures on it. So they are very much on top of it. And it looks like they're all rearing and ready to go to help you guys and help our landowners and all landowners, I guess, here in our country. So, well, guys, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedules to sit down and talk about this a little bit, because I know we had some questions from some of our other folks in our own office. Our tree farm administrator, she was trying to wrap her head about what exactly this was and how it's going to affect our tree farm members who are the landowners out there doing the work. So thank you guys for coming down, sitting down and kind of ironing some things out with me.
Our pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Awesome. Well, we want to thank you guys for joining us this month as well. Make sure you come back next month. And before I give my little sign off here, let me make sure to give a special shout out and thank you to some guy named Rob McCormick for the use of our theme song, The Same Love. That's off of his album, The Folkster. You can find more of his music on Spotify. And as always, we have a link to his website where you can find shows and music information on his professional website, excuse me. And we want to give a special thank you to Potlatch Deltic for their continued support of the show. So make sure you do come back next month when we'll have a new topic, a new discussion, and a new Voice of Forestry.